Hello everyone, and thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation. My name is Emily McMillan, and I'm a master's student with the University of Saskatchewan, and today I'm going to be presenting the evaluation of the metasedimentary rocks within the Archean Winter Lake greenstone belt of the Slave Craton Northwest Territories. So the Slave Craton contains an abundance of Archean age sedimentary rocks, which at a very high level can be split up into four main groups. There's the quartz arenite dominated package known as the Central Slave Cover Group at approximately 2.9 to 2.8 billion years. There's the turbidites that are approximately greater than 2.64 billion years. The turbidites that are slightly younger and less than 2.64 billion years. And lastly, the conglomerate-dominated rocks that are approximately 2.6 billion years. And specifically, this project is focused on studying the latter of the three units. The figure on the left here shows the known distributions of the lake conglomerate-associated rocks, where the Jackson Lake Formation of the Yellowknife Greenstone Belt is considered a type unit, and the image on the right displays both turbidite units, where a type unit to the older turbidites is the Burwash Formation of the Yellowknife Greenstone Belt. So the Winter Lake Belt, which is marked with an orange pin in the image here, is located approximately 250 kilometers north-northeast of Yellowknife. And like mentioned on the previous slide, this project targets understanding the turbidites referred to as the Itchen Formation and the conglomerate-dominated package referred to as the Sherpa Formation, and specifically focusing on their depositional and tectonic settings. To put these units into the context of the Greater Slave Craton, the Winter Lake Belt is one of several preserved greenstone belts along the eastern margin of the Central Slave Basement Complex, which is roughly defined by the dashed lines on the image here. And the belt has a cryptic relationship with the Beniah fault zone, which runs directly through the Winter Lake Belt area. Before going any further, I wanted to highlight why studying the Winter Lake Greenstone Belt is important. Firstly, the Winter Lake Belt contains a protracted geological history that is unique to the Slave Craton, with felsic rocks as old as 3.3 billion years down to the sediments deposited at around 2.6 billion years. So studying the different attributes of this belt provides information regarding early Earth evolution. Secondly, the Winter Lake Belt has been previously explored for mineralization. However, this detailed work can examine the validity of mineralization further. And lastly, another reason for studying this belt is to help create an overall better understanding of how this linear trend of greenstone belts preserved along the eastern portion of the Central Slave Basement Complex is associated with the evolution of the Slave Craton. So previous and ongoing master's student work has been undertaken by Shelby Austin Peffard in the Bolio River Greenstone Belt, Dawson Stone within the Winter Lake Belt, and Leo Champagne near the Point Lake Belt, all in collaboration with an ongoing Slave Craton VMS bedrock mapping initiative run by the Northwest Territories Geological Survey. Within the Winter Lake Belt itself, there has been some high-level mapping done prior to this project, which was mostly pioneered by Blair Harabi. And what this mapping identified is an approximate north-south strike in symphomal-like geometry with east and west limbs. However, there were unanswered questions that arose from this interpretation, such as the differences in stratigraphy and asymmetry of the units on both limbs. So in conjunction with an NTGS mapping program, recent work done by Dawson Stone, who focused on the mafic volcanic rocks of the Winter Lake Belt, was done at Big Bear Lake, New Bigging Lake, and Sherpa Lake, which ultimately suggested that the geometry of the Winter Lake Belt is best explained by a series of thrust-faulted panels, and that the mafic volcanic rocks are a product of rifting, which were sourced from an enriched mantle with variable crustal contamination. So a possible depositional environment could be a back arc-like environment. So with this new interpretation in mind, a question remains of how do these sedimentary units fit in with the overall architecture of the Winter Lake Belt and this portion of the Slave Craton. So during this past summer, I spent approximately 4 weeks mapping in the Shallow Lake Left Lake area, which is within the core of the preserved sedimentary basin, where I completed 4 transects along with additional data collection surrounding these lakes. So there are 5 specific objectives of this project, which are to produce detailed geological maps of the Itchen and Sherpa formations, which should allow for a better understanding of the belt than the previous 1 to 50,000 scale mapping, to constrain the maximum and minimum depositional age for both formations and their sediment provenance, determine their depositional and tectonic settings, compare the Itchen and Sherpa formations with equivalent units within the Slave Craton and other cratons within the Canadian Shield, And lastly, to determine if there is the potential for orogenic lode gold deposits hosted within veins and shear zones within the Sherpa Formation, as well as the Itchen Formation, or perhaps also banded iron formations and anticlines within the Itchen Formation. Okay, so I'm just going to touch on some of the preliminary results that we have, starting with the Sherpa Formation. Previous work done by different authors has led to conflicting conclusions on the Sherpa Formation. For example, mapping by Rice and others suggested that all of the sedimentary rocks of the Winter Lake Belt, excluding the Central Slave Cover Group equivalents, are a continuous package that is interlayered with the mafic volcanic rocks and all thought to be associated with an airly restricted submarine fan, whereas mapping by Harabi and others outline the sedimentary units as individual discrete packages, where the turbidites have an unknown relationship with the mafic volcanic rocks, and the conglomerates unconformably overlay the volcanics and turbidites, with no specific depositional environment outlined. So starting with stratigraphy, we were able to split the Sherpa Formation into 6 preliminary mappable facies, which were identified based on grain size, class composition, sedimentary structures, and stratigraphic position. And through mapping at a scale of 1 to 2000, accompanied by the construction of 3 detailed stratigraphic sections, it became apparent that the individual facies' lateral and vertical distribution is not extensive, which is suggestive of a rapidly changing environment. And for the most part, these 6 facies are composed of coarse-grained to conglomerate rocks that are very heterogeneous, which is also suggestive of a high-energy environment. While mapping, an abundance of sedimentary structures were observed, some of which are displayed here on the right. So shown here in the upper left image are pebble legs along with cross-bedding. In the top right image, some normal grading with mud drapes. There was some channel-like shapes, either silt-filled or pebble to cobble filled. Here you're seeing some silt-filled channels. There was planar bedding. In the bottom left picture here, there's some reactivation surfaces. And then in the bottom right, there was some trough cross bedding. These were just some of the many sedimentary structures observed. So the facies and their associated sedimentary structures are indicative of a very active, high-energy environment with fluctuating fluvial influences. Another attribute that was studied during this past field season was the different contacts between the Sherpa Formation and the mafic volcanic rocks. So I'm just going to quickly share with you guys the 3 different contacts that were observed. The first contact was a depositional one, where the basalt is scoured by the Sherpa Formation. And at this location, there is an abundance of mafic cobbles and a dominantly mafic matrix. And this contact is significant because it demonstrates that the Sherpa Formation is a product of eroding local sources. The second Sherpa Formation and mafic volcanic contact observed is a highly strained shear zone that contains an extensive gossan. The gossan is approximately 250 meters in length and about 50 meters wide. The Sherpa Formation and the mafic volcanic rocks both increase in strength of foliation towards the shear zone, and the sedimentary rocks appear to become weakly myelinatized. Mineralization at this contact includes visible pyrite, arsenopyrite, and sphalerite. The third contact observed is an erosional contact that contained a possible paleosol preserved between the sedimentary and mafic rocks. If this is indeed a paleosol, it's important because pilloid basalts deposited subaqueously were airily exposed in order to produce this regolith, which suggests major uplift. The entire cross-section of the regolith is not preserved in one local location, but instead is pieced together through multiple sections along strike in one area. One specific location demonstrates coherent pilloid basalts, which then grades into a chlorite schist that is highly disrupted, where the pilloid basalts become increasingly incoherent with an increase in chlorite alteration. And then there is an intense vuggy texture that contains abundant calcite. And then lastly, the Sherpa Formation that contains no apparent chlorite alteration. And then in other locations, hypothesized to be close to the top of the regolith, a highly chloritized section with granite and mafic volcanic clasts floating within a chloritized matrix is present. The chlorite alteration is hypothesized to have formed from intense chemical weathering, and then a fluvial system possibly came through and deposited the clasts. At another location along strike with the top of the paleosol are quartz carbonate albite veins that are perpendicular to the top of the paleosol surface. When evaluating deeper depths of the mafic volcanic rocks, no such veins were observed, and therefore these veins could suggest meteoric water that percolated through airly exposed volcanic pillows. In other locations along strike, there are regions where the regolith is not preserved and what looks like to be a truncated pillow is evident. So taking a step back from looking at stratigraphy and contacts, I just wanted to note an interesting detail about the Sherpa Formation that arose while mapping. The metamorphic grade of these lake conglomerate-like units is considered to have only approached the lower green schist facies and come after the majority of deformation occurred within the craton. However, mapping this past summer, as well as looking at thin sections collected from a previous field season by a former student, Valentina Lane, demonstrates a higher metamorphic grade for part of the formation, which could have significant implications for understanding the architecture of the belt as a whole. What can be seen in the upper figure on the right are garnet porphyroblasts. In this image, it appears the garnets are perhaps trapped within a pseudo-boundary of a remnant mudstone class, but other locations may suggest that garnets may be porphyroblasts that are disseminated throughout the muddy matrix. The lower right image shows what appears to be leucosome stringers, which suggest partial melting of the formation. The thin sections shown here possibly demonstrate seliminite formation, suggesting that the Sherpa Formation may be within the amphibolite facies. These attributes of the Sherpa Formation suggest that further evaluation is required to understand these minerals and associated textures distributions. Another interesting feature that arose while mapping is that approximately 5% of the overall class that were counted in the field area are rhyolite, which is unique because there's not a lot of rhyolite material present in the belt. Another unique class type includes ultramafic class, which can constrain the timing of ultramafic intrusions within the belt. And lastly, there was an abundance of granitoid-like material. So moving on to the Itchen Formation, these finer grained sedimentary rocks, as previously mentioned, have not really been studied. The previous work has described the Itchen as contemporaneously being deposited with felsic volcanics in the northern portion of the belt, and isogrades that were proposed by Blair Harabi suggest a westward and north and south increase in metamorphic grade from green schist to granulite. The Itchen Formation surrounding the shallow left lake area consists of samnites, semi-peelites, and mostly peelites. The original sedimentary features used to define facies are not discernible due to the strong metamorphic overprinting. However, the Itchen Formation can be split into low, medium, and high metamorphic grade facies based on the type of porphyroblast present. Some sedimentary structures observed in the field include soft sediment deformation, planar bedding, graded bedding, lenticular bedding, as well as cross bedding. Often bedding is preserved through aluminosilicate porphyroblasts, which can also provide sediment's younging direction. And not going into too much depth, I just wanted to talk about the distribution of metamorphic grades within the study area, which has been briefly evaluated by Harabi and Grant. However, 2021 fieldwork has identified more detail in regards to the metamorphic mineral assemblages present and the isograde placement. Without going into too much detail, we're looking at muscovite, biotite, and chloritoid in the low-grade rocks, cordierite, biotite, andalusite, and garnet in the medium-grade rocks, and seliminite, biotite, another generation of cordierite, as well as garnet in the highest observed metamorphic grade, along with the presence of in situ leucosomes, which is in this figure shown here. Taking a quick look at the contacts observed involving the Itchen Formation, the contact between the Itchen and the mafic volcanic rocks was not observed, and the contact between the Itchen and Sherpa formations was seldomly exposed. The contact between the two units runs largely through Shallow Lake Left Lake in the study area. However, at one location to the north of Shallow Lake, a depositional contact is observed. The Itchen Formation in the area consists of thickly bedded monotonous mudstone that contains planar bedding. At the contact, there's a shift to a class-supported cobble conglomerate facies of the Sherpa Formation. The contrast in facies is drastic and suggests that, at a minimum, a short-lived hiatus exists between the two units in order to get such a change in facies. And a last note on the Itchen Formation, 3 unique units of the Itchen were identified during the 2021 field season. First, equivalent units to the Itchen Formation in the Slave Craton sometimes contain banded iron formations. The previous mapping of the Winter Lake Belt has outlined that the Itchen only contains iron formations in the most northern extreme portion of the belt. However, mapping during the 2021 field season outlines two new regions of iron formations that contain greater than 70% garnet porphyroblasts. These iron formations may have implications for determining the age of the Itchen Formation and need to be examined further. Second, a thick ortho-quartzite unit with a tan to white mottled appearance is observed towards the northern portion of Shallow Lake, which is kind of uncharacteristic of any turbidite unit in the Slate Craton. Further research includes detrital zircon uranium-lead geochronology and petrography, which is required to evaluate this ortho-quartzite and understand if the unit is part of the Itchen Formation or if it actually belongs with the Central Slave Cover Group that also contains orthoquartzites. Lastly, a thickly bedded mudstone unit is observed at the north end of Shallow Lake, next to the orthoquartzite unit. The presence of the mudstone is not unique in itself. However, its thickness is at a minimum of 100 meters, and it has an enigmatic relationship with the orthoquartzite. Currently, a significant fault is hypothesized to have juxtaposed these units next to each other, which has not been previously documented in the Winter Lake Belt. And so just a quick summary of the two units. The Sherpa Formation is consistent with an alluvial-fluvial type environment with multiple sources that provided detritus. And instead of being a continuous sedimentary package with the Itchen Formation, I propose that the Sherpa Formation can be best explained by larger basins as well as mini basins that formed as a result of repeated faulting within the mafic volcanic turbidite sequence, which resulted in the deposition of coarse sedimentary material off of fault scarps. And I think this is associated with the strike-slip movement along the Beniah fault zone. Also, the metamorphic grade of the Sherpa Formation requires further evaluation to better understand the relationship between the Itchen Formation and the Sherpa Formation. And a brief summary of the Itchen Formation includes the lithologies of the Itchen Formation are consistent with a low-energy marine environment with the input of high-energy sedimentation. And lastly, the change in metamorphic grade through the Itchen Formation suggests tectonic influence in order to explain the pattern of metamorphism observed, mostly talking about how the center of the preserved sedimentary basin is the highest metamorphic grade. So with that, and to conclude this presentation, future work for this project includes detrital zircon uranium-lead geochronology and lutetium-hafnium isotope data for both provenance analysis and evolutionary fingerprinting, whole rock, major and trace element geochemistry to investigate the evolution of finer grained siliciclastic rocks that are lacking in zircons, as well as to evaluate the degree of chemical alteration, microprobe analysis on geothermometer and geobarometer systems to assess the PTT path, specifically in the Itchen Formation as it contains the robust metamorphic mineral assemblages that varies across the preserved sedimentary basin. Also, assay analysis on mineralized samples that were collected from within quartz veins, shear zones, and banded iron formations to assess for gold potential. Refining detailed maps and stratigraphic sections through the Sherpa Formation and Itchen Formation. And 6, detailed petrology to determine compositions, metamorphic mineral assemblages, provenance, and ore potential. Lastly, I would like to acknowledge that funding for this project was provided by the Northwest Territories Geological Survey, the Polar Continental Shelf Program, the Northern Scientific Training Program, the Canadian Northern Economic Development Agency, and an NSERC grant held jointly between the University of Saskatchewan, Mount Royal University, and the GNWT. I would like to thank Michelle, Camille, Bernadette, and Scott for their invaluable supervision and help with this project, Seamus Harder for his field assistance, and lastly, I would like to thank Dawson and Valentin for their contributions to this project. Thank you.